Hello dear learners, welcome again. In this video I am going to discuss Keynes' theory of employment. In the previous video I have already discussed classical theory of income and employment and also Keynesian criticism of classical theory. If you are interested, you can watch the video. I have given the link in the description box. So dear students, let us begin. Let us see what is there in the Keynesian theory of employment. Before that, dear students, if you have not subscribed my channel yet, please subscribe. This is my channel link. So let us move on to understand what is there in Keynes' theory of employment, how employment is determined according to Keynes' theory of employment. Before that, let us see what was some of the assumptions or some of the views of classical economists. In fact, classists believed in that there is always full employment, and this belief of classical economists was on the basis of Say's law of market, which says that supply creates its own demand. Whatever is supplied will be sold out. There will not be any problem of deficiency of demand. And secondly, it is because of flexibility of wages and interest. If at all there is any unemployment in the economy, because of flexibility of wages, because of flexibility of interest rate, there will be labor market equilibrium, there will be product market equilibrium because of the flexibility or movement of wages will establish the equilibrium in the market. But what happened during Great Depression in 1929 to 1933, this period, classist prescription failed. Whatever prescription was given by the classical economist, that failed, and it resulted into huge unemployment in USA and other developed countries. Millions of people lost their jobs. And on this backdrop, Keynes has given a theory. In fact, he has written a book called The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money in 1936. And his theory is popularly known as General Theory of Employment. So, dear learners, let us see what is there in the Keynes theory of employment and how employment is established. Keynes assumes certain things for his theory of employment. He says that the theory is relevant in the short run, in the short period, right? Unlike the classical economist, classical theory of employment is for the long run, whereas the Keynesian theory and Keynes assumes it is for short period, or it is a short run theory. And Keynes also assumed that the size of population, labor force, technology and efficiency of labor do not change in the short period. This is another assumption by the Keynes for his theory of employment. Next, wages are more or less sticky. It is not flexible, unlike the classical theory. Classists believe that wages are flexible, whereas Keynes say that wages are sticky. That is the Keynes assumption. And there is perfect competition. The market is operating perfectly. So these are some of the important assumptions of Keynes' theory of employment. And Keynes, as I told you, given the theory for the short period, not for the long period, unlike classical economists. And Keynes famously said, in the long run, we are all dead. So we should be concerned for the short period, and in general, short period in economics is 1 year or less than 1 year period. So with this assumption, Keynes propounded his theory, and he said the volume of employment in any economy depends on level of national income or output. It is the level of income and output that will determine the volume of employment in the economy. And he also concluded that the higher the level of national output or income, higher will be the volume of employment. Lower the level of national output, lower will be the volume of employment. So Keynes' theory of employment determination is also called as theory of income determination. It is simultaneously determined the volume of employment and the national income, and there is direct relation: more national income, more employment; less national income output, less volume of employment will be there in the economy. Further, Keynes' theory said that the employment is based on the principle of effective demand. The concept of this concept was given by Keynes, that is the principle of effective demand. It's a popular concept. In other words, the level of employment in any capitalist economy depends on the level of effective demand, and unemployment is attributed to deficiency of demand. Keynes say that why there is unemployment in the economy? Because there is lack of demand. Because of lack of demand, the unemployment occurs, according to Keynes. And why and how it happens? So let us see how this effective demand, what is this effective demand and how this effective demand is determined. Aggregate demand, what is effective demand? The demand at which it equalizes with the aggregate supply is called effective demand. There are several at different level of employment you will have different aggregate demand price, but the level of employment at which aggregate demand price equalizes with aggregate supply is known as effective demand. I'll show you in the diagram how it happens in the subsequent coming diagram. Let us see now further. According to Keynes, effective demand is determined by aggregate demand function or aggregate demand price and aggregate supply function or aggregate supply price. These two, aggregate demand function and aggregate supply function, jointly determines effective demand according to Keynes. And what is this aggregate demand price and aggregate supply price? Aggregate demand price is the price where the receipts or proceeds which entrepreneurs actually expect to receive at different levels of employment and production. That proceed or receipt is known as aggregate demand price, and it is the actual expectation of entrepreneurs, that is the aggregate demand price. Whereas aggregate supply price is the total amount of money which all the entrepreneurs in the economy taken together must expect. The entrepreneurs must receive it, must expect to receive from the sale of output produced by given number of workers employed. So what is the difference between aggregate demand and aggregate supply price? In case of aggregate demand price, it is remember this technical term, that is actually expect, and entrepreneurs actually expect to receive, and here must expect to receive means the entrepreneurs must receive the price where the entrepreneur is, at least there is no loss, right? If the aggregate demand price is more than supply, then that is not at all a problem, there will be profit, but at least that much the entrepreneur must expect to receive, where there is no profit, no loss, and that keeps the entrepreneurs invested. So that is what the aggregate supply price. Now let us see, with the help of an example, I'll show you how the Keynes theory of employment is determined. So here on y-axis we have receipts, all the receipts on y-axis, and on x we have volume of employment, you can see here, and this is our origin, O point, from where you can see aggregate supply curve and aggregate demand curve, both are originating from this point. And one more thing, from this point 0 to till up to E1 point, the aggregate supply curve is continuously rising, and after that it becomes vertical to y-axis, which means this is the level of full employment. And aggregate supply curve, you can see aggregate demand curve is continuously, you can see it is rising. This is our aggregate demand curve. And you can see the equilibrium point, the level of employment NE, this equilibrium level of employment, at this level both aggregate demand and aggregate supply price are equal. Okay, and before that you can see, let us take for the sake of example this N1 point. At N1 level of employment, your aggregate supply is at point C, whereas aggregate demand is at point R, means the aggregate demand price is greater than aggregate supply price. In this range from 0 till E, your aggregate demand price is greater than aggregate supply price. That means what entrepreneurs actually do receive, that is greater than the expectation of entrepreneurs that they must receive. So there is a win-win situation. There will be profit, or the entrepreneurs will remain invested in this range, and the equilibrium or the effective demand, there could be several points on the demand curve at different levels of employment, but that is not the effective demand. The effective demand is the point or the level of employment any where aggregate demand equalizes with aggregate supply. That is our effective demand, and which is conceptualized by Keynes, and that has greater relevance in the determination of volume of employment. But one thing to note here, this NE is not the full employment level. NF is the full employment level. So this gap, this is known as involuntary unemployment. This involuntary unemployment must be removed. And how this can be removed? Keynes say that this can be removed by increasing the aggregate demand, or in other words, Keynes say that there is unemployment in the economy because of deficiency of aggregate demand, or deficiency of demand in the market creates involuntarily unemployment, and there is enough supply. You can see in this range from E to E1, you can see aggregate supplies is still rising. The capacity is there in the economy, but the equilibrium is at point E. Why? Because aggregate demand. If the government or the private sector could shift because of change in either, as I told you, this aggregate demand has 4 components: C plus I plus G plus Xn. 4 components are there. So aggregate demand can be lifted, can be shifted upward, either increasing C, I, G, Xn. But during depression time, there is a fear, or there is lesser incentive to invest or spend. People become apprehensive. So it is the duty of the government should play a greater role according to Keynes. And with the increase in G, there will be shift in aggregate demand, and the aggregate demand will shift from 80 to 81. And with the shift in aggregate demand, what we see, the equilibrium or the effective demand point shifts from E to E1, and at this point you can see there is full employment equilibrium. So in fact, according to Keynes, there is always possibility of having less than full employment in the economy, less than full employment equilibrium in the economy. Why? Because there is always deficiency of demand according to Keynes. And here comes the role of the government, and government can play a significant role in increasing aggregate demand and increasing the employment in the economy. So let us quickly see, this is our effective demand point, where aggregate demand and aggregate supply price are equal, and this is equilibrium level of employment, and this is the equilibrium level of income or receipts, that is OM. And this can be increased by increasing aggregate demand, and that can be done with the expansionary fiscal policy or by increasing government expenditure. This involuntary unemployment can be removed by the government. So this is in brief, you can say, the Keynes theory of employment can be explained with the help of the diagram. So let us see now the key points of Keynes theory of employment. The key points are: number one, that full employment is not a normal characteristics of capitalist economy. In fact, there is probability of less than full employment which are normal in any capitalist economy, unlike the classical economists who believe that there is always full employment. Whereas Keynes say that there is always possibility of less than full employment in the economy, and the main reason for the unemployment in the economy is the lack of aggregate demand or the deficiency of aggregate demand, and this unemployment can be reduced or removed by increasing aggregate demand in the economy. That's what Keynes had the view. So in recession period, expansionary fiscal policy or increasing public expenditure, more expenditure by the government, can stimulate the economic activity in the economy, and with the increase in expenditure, aggregate demand will increase, and with the increase in aggregate demand, employment in the economy will also increase. So in other words, you can say Keynes overemphasized from the demand side of the economy, that he assigned greater importance to aggregate demand and assumed aggregate supply as constant, you can say, or aggregate supply variables which are influencing aggregate supply, that is given, or there is always less than full employment of resources in the economy. That's what Keynes believed. And during recession, government should borrow more to offset fall in private expenditure. What happens during recession? Private expenditure falls, investment falls, so that can be compensated by the government by borrowing more from the market and investing it. So, and there is one more conclusion of Keynes, that there is no crowding out during recession. During recession, if government borrows from the market, that is not going to impact the private investment. Investment will not fall because of the government borrowing from the market, though we will see in criticism how increase in government borrowing will lead to increase in interest rate, and there may be financial crowding out, and there may be resource crowding out that happens actually. So these are some of the important key points of Keynes theory of employment. Now let us quickly see the criticism of Keynes theory of employment. First criticism of Keynes theory is the borrowing causes higher interest rates and financial crowding out take place. When government borrows more, it causes interest rate to increase, and that leads to financial crowding out, because we know that there is indirect relation between interest rate and investment. When interest rate increases, the investment will fall down. For a government to borrow more, what happens? The interest rate on bond rises, and when this rises, higher interest rate will discourage investment by the private sector. So this is one of the criticism labeled against Keynes' theory of employment, or Keynes' prescription to borrow more by the government, and that increases interest rate, and ultimately that influences the investment by the private sector. Next criticism is resource crowding out also take place. If government borrows to finance higher investment, this government borrowing is from the private sector, from the open market, and that way private sector will be having lesser funds to finance private sector investment. So there is a competition for the same resource available or the fund available in the market. So there will be a resource crowding out as well. At the same time, there will be financial crowding out also. And third important criticism is a problem of fiscal expansion is that it all often comes with inflation. When there is more investment by the government, in fact, the impact of more expenditure on demand takes time, and economy recovers late by the investment of the government, and it causes immediate effect of more expenditure is inflation in the economy, because it increases more income in the economy, demand increases quickly than the supply side, and that creates inflation in the economy. So this is the third important criticism labeled against Keynes. Fourth one, it encourages big government. What does it mean? Encourages big government means during recession, government increases spending, and even after recession, when things are okay, when the economy working normally, even that time government keep on spending more. And how the government can spend more? For that, government needs to tax more. So high tax will lead to more spending regime, and we know that high tax has a negative multiplier effect, and that is not good for the economy. So this big budgets of government is not at all suitable during normal times, but because the governments become used to or habitual of investing, having big budgets and taxing more to the people, that creates a problem. So that is another criticism labeled against Keynes. Next point is time lag. Whenever government spending take place, borrowing and spending increases demand, no doubt, but that takes time. It takes time to increase the aggregate demand. And as we have already discussed in the previous criticism, previous point, third point, that it leads to inflation in the economy. So there is a time element, time lag is there. It is not quick, right? So that is another criticism. And lastly, technology, labor efficiency do change even in the short period, as Keynes assumed that population, labor and labor productivity, efficiency do not change. But actually what we see in the modern world, technology and labor efficiency may change or can change even in the short period. So this all are important criticism of Keynes' theory of income and employment. So dear students, we have studied what are the different criticism of Keynes' theory, how employment is determined by the level of employment, level of output and income, and level of output and income depends on effective demand, and effective demand depends on, I'll show you quickly here, your employment depends on the output, level of output and income, right? Y. And this depends on effective demand, and effective demand in turn is determined by aggregate demand price and aggregate supply price, and Keynes assigned greater role to aggregate demand, and by lifting the aggregate demand, by shifting aggregate demand through investing more by the government, the involuntary unemployment can be removed, can be reduced by the government. That's what the Keynes theory of employment is. Thank you so much, students. If you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe, give your comments and feedback. If you have any question, drop your questions in the comment box. Thank you so much.